Hello, and welcome to Witches in Finland. My name is Sami, and I'm a psychoanalytic psychotherapist and witch enthusiast from Finland. Today's topic is, in one sentence, the film is a fantasy of human mind, and witchcraft is a fantasy of the human mind. Today is all about the women. First of all, I like to give you an overview of life and morality of the women in the 17th century.
Witches.
Even in the 17th century, there were few jobs for women. Some of them worked spinning cloth. Women were milliners, dyers, and embroiderers. There were washerwomen. Some worked in food preparation, such as brewers, bakers, etc. Women also sold food in the streets. A very common job for women was domestic servant. Other women were midwives and kind of medicine sellers or makers. A farmer's wife, of course, also milked cows, fed animals, and grew herbs and vegetables. She often kept bees. She also took goods to market to sell. On top of that, she had to cook, wash the family's clothes, and clean the house. The 17th century housewife was also supposed to have some kind of knowledge of medicine and be able to treat her family illnesses. According to Lappalainen, in that time there was no medical doctors in Finland, and even only few in motherland Sweden, of which Finland was still part at that time. Most women were housewives, and they were kept very busy. Most men could not run a farm or a business without their wives' help. Many women also worked for others. Mirkka Lappalainen is a Finnish doctor of philosophy and historian. In her book Northern Witches 2018, she writes, "An essential building block of a woman's reputation was sexual morality. Doubt about loose morality and numerous partners tarnished a woman's reputation. The same thing happened to men. All extramarital sex was criminalized. Humans' reputation were raised at the witch trials to closer focus. Lifestyles, harmony, use of alcohol, and relationships with family members were highlighted." According to Eilola, key issues for women in history were getting married, motherhood and succeeding in it, household care such as caring for livestock and animals, brewing beer, buttering the butter, and baking and other food preparation. If something threatened the world inside the home from outside, one might end up on the courtroom. The image of a female witch was indeed divided and ambiguous. On the other hand, she was a human whose forbidden feelings disobeyed her. She was contagious, malevolent, and aggressive. On the other hand, she lacked the desirable qualities of early modern age women, such as obedience, lovingness, forgiveness, and caring. According to Kathleen Duffy, 2020, in the 16th century and through long tradition, women were held to be both lustful in their sexuality and weak in their religious faith. formal education was reserved for males, and only few women were educated outside the home. Duffy is quoting Miles 1990. Because medieval women had not enjoyed the conditions necessary for formulating self-representations that could have informed collective male views of women, men created representations of women out of their own fears and fantasies. Medieval men figured woman as a frightening and fascinating creature whose anger and rejection could deprive men of gratification, delight, and ultimately life and salvation. Okay, I will talk more about these possible fantasies in the later episodes, topic that is related to succubus theme, but now my focus is in life, morality, aggression, and sexuality. Lennon in 2006 states that in the time of the old gods, sexuality has still been considered as a rather positive force in man. Human wealth and harvest were combined with fertility and sexuality. As Reenkola 2004 writes, in Finland it was a long time tradition to jump over a cake in a skirt without any underwear, and after that put the cake in the oven. This made the cake more likely to rise well. There was enormous power in the women's vagina. With Christianity, the idea of original sin became, and sexuality became, a force of disorder. There are also other religions where sexual abstinence has been taken as an ideal. Did you know that official marriage only began to become widespread from the Middle Ages, and that it was not until the 17th century that a priestly ordinance might be required in Scandinavia? Is it a coincidence that at the same time as sexuality began to be restricted and people were raised to marital fidelity, witch hunts also peaked? Marriage began to be required. According to Lennon and based on historical facts, it is very difficult to claim that the witch hunts were born because the woman was subjugated. In the Nordic countries, the position of woman was moderately good in many respects. The general poverty of Finns also made men and women equal. Finland also had the Swedish so-called land law or land act in force, which also defined the status of women. The woman was considered to be practically part of the man's property. It is sometimes difficult to deduce who brought the witchcraft charge, because often men represented their wives in the courts as well. However, very often women represented themselves in Finnish court, depending on the region of Finland a little bit. Lennon in 2007 states that the weaker position of women does not explain witch hunts, as is often claimed. Let's now get really serious. We dive into the world of Bible and witch doctrine. In the Bible, in the book of Moses, there's a much quoted passage in the literature where the witch is severely condemned. This is not entirely certain. Either it might also be a fatal translation error. The original purpose in the part of the text was more like deportation and not execution. Heikkinen 1969 clarified the background of the book Malleus Maleficarum. The background of the work is influenced by the ideal of its time, the asceticism. Love was considered a form of mental illness and therefore also had connection to the devil. In the book, sexuality has turned into porn. It is possible that the forbidden fruit turned into aggression. In Finland, the witch doctrine was hardly on display only in the trials of Åland Island in Ahvenanmaa. It was clearly followed and used. I will read from the Malleus Maleficarum, translated by Montage. Why superstition is chiefly found in women? The natural reason is that she is more carnal than a man, as is clear from her many carnal abomination. And it should be noted that there was a defect in the formation of the first woman, since she was formed from a bent rib, that is, a rib of the breast, which is bent as it were in a contrary direction to a man. And since through this defect she is an imperfect animal, she always deceives. And all this is indicated by the etymology of the word for femina, comes from fe and minus, since she is ever weaker to hold and preserve the faith, and this as regards fate is of her very nature, although both by grace and nature faith never failed in the Blessed Virgin, even at the time of Christ's Passion, when it failed in all men. I have also read that when actually the writer Kramer was himself in the court, defendants were specifically women. Next I will quote John Milton's Paradise Lost, just to remind you about the story of Adam and Eve. Here grows the cure of all this fruit divine, fair to the eye, inviting to taste, of virtue to make wise. What hinders then to reach and feed at once both body and mind? So saying, her rash hand in evil hour forth reaching to the fruit, she plucked, she eat. Earth felt the wound, and nature from the seed. Shy to all her works, gave signs of woe, that all was lost. As Jennifer Putnam has stated in her 2009 essay, John Milton's Satan in Paradise Lost is a proud, passionately manipulative and complex figure who suffers from an internal conflict he cannot get rid of. I would like to add that Satan has his inner demons. He uses passionate manipulation not only for his own helpers but also for Eve, when he tempts her to taste an apple from the tree of knowledge. After seeing Adam and Eve first time, Lucifer even cries. And in the first meeting with Eve, he even hesitates for a moment. In Eve's last temptation, he appears as a serpent. He praises Eve's heavenly beauty and enchanting nature, whispers in her ear that perhaps Eve is really a goddess. Later, Satan walks in the garden in the form of cherub. He also realizes that perfect garden will never be his. He ponders that if he did repent and receive mercy, he ends up finding that pride would grow within him again, and he would end up the same. First, the archangel Lucifer, then the prince of demons, and finally the serpent of paradise will continue on the path of his choice. If man is created in the image of God, his goal is the destruction of man. According to Levack 1987, witchcraft was sex-related but not a sex-specific crime. Men were persecuted in Europe, especially when witchcraft involved political sorcery and heresy. Third situation that led to the persecution of substantial numbers of male witches occurred when witch hunts got out of control and there was chain reaction accusations. Also Levack and many others, of course, make a reference to Maleus Maleficarum when talking about that to some extent women were suspected of witchcraft because they were believed to be morally weaker than men and more likely therefore to succumb to diabolical temptation. However, sexuality and love do not in themselves explain witch hunts. According to Nennon in 2007, pornographic motives and sadism are standard illustrations in literature of witch hunts, but in the actual witch trials, sex was little or not featured. In so-called Sabbath trials, sexuality was on the table, but not always. Descendants, modern generations, have made sexuality a trademark of witch hunts. Nennon 2007 asks if male witches are an unsexy subject. The question is, above all, that much has been written about male witch in various books and also in that book. Change, he says, has also taken place in art. Male witches were common in art and church paintings in the past. Only more modern art has focused on the female witches. In the movies, films, the majority of female witches is probably even clearer, like also in Finnish cinema. Nenonen and Kervinen, 1994, found 2,000 Finnish witch trial cases between 16th and 18th century. Statistics show that in Finland and also in some other countries such as Russia, Estonia and Iceland, the accused were mostly men. In some areas and at some times in Finland, the majority were women. However, the images are very strong and there are quite clearly different opinions also among researchers. PhD Rita Vollmer from Trieste University 2009 in her article Witchfinders, Witch Hunters or Kings of the Sabbath, the prominent role of men in the mass persecutions of the Rhine-Meuse area, brings out very different point of view. She starts, the early modern witch hunts can, in one very clear sense, be labeled as a manifestation of legalized male violence against women. Also, Hannah Sharon, 2013, in her article based on her master's studies constructing the Wicked Witch, discourses of power in the witch hunts of early modern Germany, writes, since by the nature of all women were susceptible to witchcraft, men could use the witch hunts as a reign of terror over their female counterparts. weeding out atypical women and reinforcing male authority and traditional sex roles through a fear of punishment. The people of early modern Germany were urged to view witches as more than the old hags of the folklore and legend, but as a threat to their way of life. In reality, witches were women who had threatened men's established power. Professor Diane Perkis is a fellow and tutor of English at Keble College, Oxford. She writes in her book The Witch in History from 1996, "Do you believe this story? Once upon a time there was a woman who lived on the edge of a village. She lived alone in her own house, surrounded by her garden, in which she grew all manner of herbs and other healing plants. The woman was a healer and midwife. She helped women give birth, and she had healing hands. She used her knowledge of herbs and her common sense to help sick. Even though this woman was harmless, she posed a threat to the fearful. Her medical knowledge threatened the doctor. Her independence and freedom threatened men. So the Inquisition defended her and cruelly tortured her into confessing to lies about the devil. She was burned alive by men who hated women, along with millions of others just like her." Diane Perkis asks, how did radical feminists come to need a Holocaust of their own? You might want to find the answer from her book. But thousands of women do believe this story. It is still being retold in full or in part by women who are academics, but also poets, novelists, popular historians, theologians, dramatists. It is compelling, even horrifying. I would like to add that you can find this exact story, for example, in the HBO series Penny Dreadful, which I love, by the way, but in season 2, when Vanessa Ives go to the consultation of a witch, the story is exactly this. Back to Perkis. Women who died were not quite the woman of the story, and they were not killed for quite the same reasons. You may have heard about that witches were midwives and nurses. However, there is no evidence that the majority of those accused were healers and midwives. You can read more about this midwife theory, for example, in Norman Cohn's wonderful book Inner Demons, and also 1973 book Witches, Midwives and Nurses by Ehrenreich and English. All this has been known for some time, yet in the teeth of the evidence, some women continue to find this story believable, continue to circulate it. At its worst, knowledge of history, research has been sought through empathy methods. Kind of meditation has provided insights into how one's own flesh is burning, men around us shouting insults, and women and children are watching. I would add that people had many kind of sexual and sadistical fantasies in their own minds. Such can be found also in the false memories. Diane Perkis states that witch is also a woman's fantasy, not just a man's nightmare. It can be also a positive fantasy. After all, even today there are practitioners of witchcraft who draw strength from these images. Not only does the witch's hammer attract attention for fear of stealing a male phallus, Of course, the work is also hostile to women. However, there were many and varied books of witch doctrine in that time, but the witch's hammer, Malleus Maleficarum, appears a lot in the feminist corner. After all, of course, feminists also successfully bring up issues that would be hidden, for example, uncomfortable truths. According to Lappalainen in Finland, the devil-related fantasies were the strangest part of the Sabbath trials and at the same time those of most interest to both contemporaries and posterity. However, the general atmosphere during that time was sexually negative. But sex crimes linked to Finnish witchcraft are related to the problems of life management of people involved in the cases, not to demonic eroticism. According to a new study, as Perkis points out, witch hunts cannot be viewed only as a persecution by men against women. More truth should be given to women's relationships. When looking at a woman in history, her position cannot be compared to that of a modern paid woman. Witch accusations made by women should be seen in the context of their lives. With this in mind, the witch provides to be a figure that allowed women to deal with fears and insecurities related to their own social identity. According to Levack, the image of the witch as a morally weak and sexually inclined was highly instrumental in leading members of the educated classes to suspect and prosecute women as witches, among the common people who very often were the first to accuse or denounce witches and who testified against them. It was somewhat less importance. Let's now move to the movie Noita, palaa, elämään. And don't worry if you don't want to watch this movie from YouTube, because it does not have English text. You can still follow this. It is perhaps enough if you watch one trailer so you get the feeling. I can link it in my social media. Also, the play in which the movie is based has not been translated in English. There is one American rip-off, The Naked Witch, that is copied from this movie. Noita, palaa, elämään is one of the first, if not the first movie where witch returns after their death to revenge. Perhaps in the future I will make the English text to it. Let's see. Let's now take a short look at the differences between the storyline in the movie and in the play. The film is based on Mika Waltari's 1947 play of the same name. Actually, you should translate the Finnish name to the Return of the Witch or Resurrection of the Witch, because she has been dead 300 years and she is coming back to life. Movie is known by the English name The Witch, and it is from the year 1952. It was directed by Roland F. Hällström. Nudity scenes provoked a lot of controversy at the time, but it also helped the film to get sold into the US and in the West, Germany. Archeological team unearths a body of a young woman who was told to be a witch, buried in a bog or swamp some 300 years ago. The troupe includes an archaeologist couple and a painter, as well as the son of the manor owner. The owner of the manor is the Baron. The house has service staff such as kitchen staff, herdsmen and laborers. The witch's stabbed body is lifted up and transported to the basement. In particular, the play reveals that the painter, the artist, has a relationship with this woman who is married to this archaeologist. The film refers to the husband's inability to satisfy his wife. The sideline is the knowledge that the Baron has at one time slept with a lot of women in the area and probably has unmarried children. Generations ago, the Baron's ancestor had done the same thing, but one girl in the area had not agreed into this, and for this reason has been persecuted as a witch, killed and buried in a swamp in her time. In one night there's a thunderstorm and there are lots of noises coming behind the door. Men go to open the door and there's a naked girl. In the film, the girl is found dropped into a digged hole in the swamp, the grave. It becomes clear that the girl has lost her memory.
Äikäs. Salama iski kellariin. Noita palasi elämään.
The villagers are terrified. The girl runs around the country and causes confusion. The troupe initially considers various rational explanations as to whether the girl has been struck by lightning and has lost her memory. Is the girl mentally ill and one of the Baron's unmarried descendants, whether she tries to seduce the Baron's son to get the property? Gradually, the seeds of the discord began to germinate between people. Jealousy, fights arise. The scientist, rational Hannu, begins to doubt his entire worldview. Could it still be that the witch had returned to revenge? Suddenly, the girl disappears. And this is where the original play would have ended. The witch have achieved what she wants. She has caused the Baron to have a heart attack and the mansion is on fire. She returns to her grave. The couple has drifted into questionable acts and has been fully prepared to kill the girl. Next, however, a complete flop occurs in the film. Hannu wakes up. He just had a dream. The girl has been swimming. Her clothes have been escaped with the boat in the storm and she has suffered a temporary memory loss. She's a theater student, a summer guest on the area, and now she apologizes for her strange behavior. The mansion is not burned, the Baron is alive and all intact. Only Hannu has changed. So, why this silly transformation into comedy? I have read that Mika Waltari was serious about this play. It was also one of the few works that the author was happy with. Theater director turned his head and stated that the audience was not ready to receive this. Probably he was right too. In that time people were living in the post-war period and the nation longed for dance and entertainment, something light. In Finland, actually 14 meters of the film was censored, including the line, "I want to hold a young warm body in my arms, in the meadow, among flowers, naked, in the warmth of fire, in the warmth of blood." The film deals with the class differences but also paints a very simple and raw picture of the working population. On the other hand, which is like blow to the face of high-class humanists. The owner class, on the other hand, is revealed to be exploiters and alcoholics. The film was meant to be a comedy, and so it is understood. However, it does not have any characters that you can identify with. Especially the play has a very sadistic undertone. The film, on the other hand, manages to be even hostile to women, probably repeated 10 times that every woman is a witch. This is far from the author's text, where there is compassion, especially on the girl's side. I would think that Waltari's message was indeed in the layers of the film. He was very interested in psychoanalysis long before writing the play. He also refers directly to psychoanalysis, the layers of the human mind and the subconscious in his play. His main message is that every human being is capable of evil deeds, and there are uncontrollable forces within everyone that also overcome a rational worldview and science. He also addressed human sadism towards each other in his other works through the theme of witchcraft.
Halusit tutustua Noitaan, paholaisiin. Löysit itsesi.
When a married couple at the center of film, and especially in the play, tries to test Birgit, a witch girl, the means of testing are like the textbooks of witch hunters. Birgit is pressed under the surface in the water, and a needle is dipped into her back. I think the author tried to describe that the witch symbolizes the subconscious. Freud himself described his work as archeology. A swamp is likely to represent a deeper sediment-based layer from which energy is uncontrolled when released. People are struggling with their impulses, and they try to keep an idealistic image of morality in front of them. In the end, man is forced to admit that evil dwells in him, and it is not something external. It is really a shame that the message was buried under silly nonsense. The film received pretty bad reviews. Men appreciated Mirja Mane, who played the role of a witch, more than women. It is interesting what the film can reflect about the writer's own state of mind at the time of its writing. Of course, it is possible, as has been interpreted, that he also describes in it the post-war pessimism about man and gives a warning. On the other hand, he had begun to suffer from manic depressive states of mind, accompanied by at least one psychotic episode. He had received treatment in Italy and Finland. At least here he also received insulin shock therapy. The cycle was typically repeated as follows: enormous amount of work, followed by drinking, occasional relationships, ending them and thinking, a new love, and the beginning of work. You have probably heard one of his greatest works, Sinuhe, the Egyptian, that has been translated in several languages and filmed in Hollywood. The movie is actually quite awful, but if you want to read something great, find this book. Sinuhe was made about the same time with the resurrection of the witch. According to Rajala, Waltari found the subject for his play in a magazine called Vekko Journal. There had been small news that a well-preserved woman's body had been found in a swamp somewhere in Denmark. Investigators speculated that this was a woman convicted as a witch. Mika Waltari was very familiar and interested in witch trials and history. In his memoirs, he says that he found a book on the subject in the Lillehammer Library, Norway. After that, he became acquainted with German language works and borrowed more from the University of Helsinki. It must be borne in mind that witchcraft research was still very limited in his time. For many facts, I have used 2 books of Panu Rajala. One of them is Noita palaa näyttämölle 1998. It is a book about Mika Waltari's theatrical plays, and Panu Rajala's Unio Mystica, Mika Waltari's Life and Works, 2011 edition. Let's now move on to psychoanalytical part of my episode. In this episode, I want to continue the theme of women and approach the subject through the theories of psychoanalyst Melanie Klein and her followers. I will use her useful theories also later, so here is a brief introduction into her theories. You can probably find more information, but Melanie Klein was born in 1882 and died in 1960. She was an Austrian-British author and psychoanalyst known for her work in child analysis. She was a primary figure in the development of object relations theory. I will also return to the theme of women's sexuality and aggression after I have talked a little about the layers of the mind. According to Ronald Britton, Melanie Klein emphasized that splitting is a major defensive activity. It is also a part of normal development of the child, but also pathological in contrast to normal repression. You may have heard that in the defense mechanism of splitting, people are divided into good and bad categories. But to be more precise, how I understand it, I quote psychoanalyst Veikko Tähkä that in splitting there are no gray areas. It is not possible to see things from different angles. Where there is black, there is no white, and vice versa. Another post-Kleinian, Otto Kernberg, borderline pathology specialist, talks how people have tendency to idealize others or themselves. Because this valuation is not based on the reality, they can soon face the feelings of frustration, letdown, and disappointment. Emotions that are poorly tolerated among the people who have personality problems that leads to the devaluation of the object or self. So from idealization to devaluation. Repression could be shortly described as an ability to push away disturbing thoughts when they are not needed, like sexual thoughts in the middle of the meeting. Repression is like a flexible door in which you can enter and out, but splitting is more like a barrier. The main point and relation to my topic today is that the unconscious fantasy is not buried into some internal psychic vault to be visited in dreams, but dislocated and unrecognized all around and active. You may have heard of acting out when emotions are not tolerated in the mind but acted in real life. One simple example. We can all do this when we are facing two difficult things in life. If somebody have rejected or left us, we might start to find somebody else instead, try to feel these difficult emotions. In the movie Return of the Witch, there's a dream sequence. There is a scene where Birgit, the witch, turns a stick into a snake and back to the stick. Most of these animals, which are utilized as genital symbols in mythology and folklore, play this part also in dreams. The fish, snail, cat, mouse, but above all the snake, which is the most important symbol of the male member. It can also be symbolized by objects that can penetrate the body and cause injury. Think of knives, daggers, lances, swords, and firearms. In the movie there was a gun, and also in the play the witch picker was used. It is a needle that was used for the find the witch's mark in the trials. In many cultures, the origin of the tombstone had the idea that the dead do not come back to haunt us if we put the stone on top of them. In psychoanalytic theory, this can be seen also as a return of the superego, like the witch's curse in my first episode. Like the voice of the mother, father, grandfather, teacher who comes to judge us. The return of the witch can be also understood as a punishment for our sins. For example, bodies of different wars in Finland are buried underneath us, especially in our civil war. The Red Party men and women, our former neighbors, were killed in the woods. Our own inner self, slimy black lizard, who has no right to live because of its badness, would be better for everybody if I am tortured and killed and left for the woods. Fear, of course, that somebody might think that I'm worthless, unlovable, because the things I have done, said, or even thought. Now let's go back to what we were discussing earlier. Perhaps the character of the witch also has features of mania in the movie. Manic defense is a protection against the experiences of smallness and the experience of uncontrollability, also against annihilation anxiety, perhaps. As Otto Kernberg has described, behind modesty may also lie images of omnipotence. In omnipotence, you feel like Bruce Almighty. Finnish psychoanalyst Elina Reenkola, 2004, has also addressed this issue from a woman's perspective. There may also be experiences of shame, smallness, and inability behind magical healing. Such may arise, for example, in the need of a young woman to tame and heal murderers or other bad men. The purpose of this type of goal of perfection may be that it brings comfort. Such fantasies often feel shameful and need to be hidden. I will talk about jealousy much more later, but in the meantime I note that jealousy wakes up easily just when in an equal relationship one succeeds better than the other. Like so often, the woman is the centerpiece of the movie or other art. According to Reenkola, a girl's development also includes the fact that girl may want to show off her body. This can feel both ecstatic and shameful. Desire can feel like frightening force that is like a whirlwind that might swallow everything. A woman may also fear being a witch or a whore when revealing her own desires. The Madonna is glorified, but not the sexual woman. Purity, control, cleanliness, and good smell are woman's ideals instead of immoral wildness. A modern woman can also be ashamed if she can't talk directly about sex and porn. I also recommend reading the mythological Electra and Kore myths that help you understand a woman's developmental challenges in relations to her parents. Electra and Kore are also avengers. At the heart of today's film is the revenge of the witch. Revenge can be an act or a fantasy. In the Greek mythology, the Erines or Furies were 3 goddesses of vengeance. In the movie, there's a funny scene where 3 old women are walking across the river in the bridge, and Birgit sees them and she breaks the bridge. Actually, these women remind me of 3 mythological witches. The Erines or Furies, they were 3 goddesses of vengeance and retribution who punished men for crimes against the natural order. The Furies were ugly, winged women with hair, arms and waists, entwined with poisonous serpents. As Reenkola, 2008, notes, fuel of the revenge are experiences of shame. Narcissistic rage is originally from the theory of Heinz Kohut. It means that your ideal self will be offended and the experience of being nullified, the lack of respect, will be turned into rage. Aggressive thoughts or behavior can also cause shame. A man's revenge can be glorious. A woman's revenge is somehow considered more shameful. Today I want to end here. What we have learned, I feel quite a lot of historical facts. I have learned to appreciate Mika Waltari's play more and more, and perhaps I see finally what he wanted to say. I hope you have learned something new about yourselves or got some new viewpoint for your work. Hope to see you soon again. Next time in Halloween special I let go of hell. Until that, greet your inner demons so that they won't come to visit you without asking.
Witches.
Some of the sources I didn't mention before. Elina Reenkola 2004, Passionate Woman in Finnish. Elina Reenkola 2008, Woman and Anger in Finnish. Sigmund Freud 1999, Finnish edition of the Interpretation of Dreams. Ronald Britton 2004 edition, Sex, Death and the Superego. John Milton, Paradise Lost 1667. I used 1996 edition. Jennifer Putnam 2009, The Psychology of Satan. Mahrouf Hossein 2017, Psychoanalytic Theory used in English Literature, a descriptive study, article of Rita Woltmer. And of course Diane Perkins was mentioned. Some of the other sources, please contact me by email soulsanitarium@gmail.com. I will send you a list. Thanks. Bye.